How did a quiet street in Airdrie become the site of a cold-blooded execution that shook Scotland's underworld to its core? September the 6th, 2018. The chilling quiet of Airdrie is shattered when Gary Moore, a devoted father of two and beloved gym owner, steps out of his home into the dark unknown. He wasn't just a gym owner. Known as a gentle giant, he was deeply respected in his community for helping troubled youths through fitness. Laughter from children playing nearby drifts through the air. A man with a bag of chips joins Gary briefly. Their conversation interrupted as a white Skoda Fabia slowly prowls down the street. Its headlights flash momentarily before the passenger door opens. A masked figure steps out, his gloved hands tightened around a weapon. The calm suburban night is seconds away from erupting into chaos. 9 deafening shots shatter the stillness of the night, claiming Gary Moore's life on his own doorstep. Was this a calculated execution or a senseless act of violence? The answer seems obvious. It was no accident. But why would anyone target a humble gym owner and devoted father? Beneath this soft, kind image lied rumours about his connections with Scotland's murky narcotic trade. Could this dark secret be the reason for his death? And perhaps more chillingly, did justice ever catch up with the perpetrator? Or did this case fade into obscurity, buried in the shadows of unsolved crime? This is the story we're uncovering today. As we established, this wasn't a rack demand of violence, it was an execution. A meticulously planned attack tied to Scotland's murky underworld of narcotics, debt and violent retribution. This tragic incident would spark a complex investigation that unravelled a web of crimes, exposing a ruthless hit squad responsible for multiple eliminations, attempted assassinations and terror that spanned years. The culprits? 3 men, Barry Harvey, Darren Owen and Thomas Guthrie. It turns out that these men were leaving a trail of violence everywhere they went, and it took a long time before they were brought to justice. What's more, catching these 3 criminals was just as hard as identifying them. What followed was a relentless pursuit of justice. After a lengthy investigation and a happening trial, they've now been jailed for a total of 59 years. But their violent spree leaves behind grieving families, scarred communities, and an unsettling reminder of organised crime's grip on society. But who was the man with the bag of chips? And who was the driver of the white Skoda? He was identified as Neil Anderson. The two exchanged words, unaware of the looming danger. As they were chatting, a white Skoda Fabia approached. Its headlights flickered momentarily as it slowed down, an eerie signal of what was to come. A figure emerged from the rear passenger door, concealed in a hood and wearing blue latex gloves. In his hand, he held a weapon. Gary turned to face him. Within seconds, the calm suburban street was filled with the sound of gunfire. 9 bullets tore through the air, 3 striking Gary in the head and 6 more to his body. Neil Anderson, frozen for a moment, fled in terror. Children playing nearby screamed, their laughter replaced by cries of fear. The man retreated to the Skoda, which sped off into the night. Gary lay motionless on his doorstep, his life extinguished in a targeted, brutal attack. Emergency services arrived quickly, but Gary was pronounced dead at the scene. Forensic teams scoured the area, recovering ballistic evidence. Hours later, the white Skoda was discovered engulfed in flames near Milngavie, a deliberate act to erase all traces of the crime. Detectives quickly ruled out randomness. This was a deliberate execution. Rumours of ties to Scotland's narcotic underworld swirled, but Gary's family insisted on a different truth. In an emotional plea, his sister Lindsay Moore spoke of the family's devastation. There are no words to describe the devastation we have experienced as a family, losing a son, brother, father and uncle. Our hearts have been broken, and we cannot understand how anyone could even consider taking this course of action against another human being. Gary did not deserve this. No one deserves this. Gary's family describe him as a gentle giant, devoted to his 2 young children. His sister added, "He was my wee brother and, as his big sister, I always felt it was my job to look after him." Despite their grief, Gary's family made a public appeal for information, hoping for answers. Lindsay urged, "Please don't let another family suffer like we have. If you know anything, please tell the police." Gary Moore's elimination presented the police with a perplexing case. Despite the calculated nature of the crime, detectives faced a frustrating lack of leads in the early days of their investigation. Detective Superintendent Alan Burton, leading the inquiry, revealed a troubling reality. The public wasn't coming forward. "It's the first time in over 5 years of investigating homicides that we've had no response from the public," he stated. "There have been no calls to the police, This has traumatised Gary's family. Their hearts have been ripped from them. They can see we're not getting the feedback from the community we usually get in a murder investigation. The silence wasn't without reason. Many in the community feared repercussions for speaking out. Burton acknowledged this possibility. There's the possibility that the people who know about it don't care about what happened to Gary, or they fear reprisals. If it's a fear that you may be attacked by the person involved, we can protect you. The breakthrough came when officers revisited the scene 9 days after the elimination. Speaking to around 40 motorists, investigators uncovered new details about the getaway car. The white Skoda Fabia, burned out and abandoned, became a focal point. Forensic experts determined it had been stolen from Glasgow's Pollokshields area a month earlier, on August the 2nd. Its original registration plate, SH13UMG, had likely been swapped out during the gang's operations. The car had reportedly been spotted at multiple locations on the night of the crime, including Bauhaus Bray Road. These sightings provided critical insights into the movements of Gary's assailants. Still, questions lingered. Was the execution tied to Gary's past associations? Detective Superintendent Burton didn't dismiss this possibility. We'll be looking into Gary's associates. If he was part of a crime group, then someone needs to tell us. But Gary had little involvement with the police. He had no serious previous convictions. Either something happened recently, or there's been an ongoing feud he's failed to mention to family. We don't know if this is a revenge from the past. The investigation's complexity deepened as details about Gary's life surfaced. His family admitted he had struggled with addiction in the past, but had worked hard to turn his life around through his fitness business. Just months before his death, Gary had been warned by the police of a potential threat to his safety, but he dismissed their concerns. Despite the challenges, the investigators pressed on. Burton emphasised the urgency of catching the culprits. A guy is running about with a gun. We need to take him off the streets. As the search for answers continued, the investigation uncovered links to a much larger web of violence and crime, one that stretched beyond Gary Moore's tragic death. Another tragedy turned up, and not very far from Gary's death. 4 months after Gary Moore's elimination, the communities of Cambuslang and Blantyre rocked in Lanarkshire. On February the 11th, 2019, the charred remains of a stolen black Mercedes GLE were discovered in Greenhall Park, Blantyre. Inside, the police made a horrifying discovery. The body of a 36-year-old Rafał Lajko, a Polish national who'd been hit in the head before the vehicle was set ablaze. Rafał's elimination was just as calculated as it was brutal. A father of one, he'd arrived in Scotland just 2 days earlier from his home in Poland, intending to visit family in Tayside. But his journey ended in violence. The police determined that he had been in East Kilbride and Cambuslang earlier on the day of his tragic death. By 7:55 p.m, emergency services were extinguishing the burning Mercedes, only to find Rafał's body slumped inside. Forensic teams uncovered a grim detail: a badly damaged Italian Beretta weapon lying near Rafał's left leg. Fire had rendered the weapon inoperable, but investigators found it loaded with 5 live bullets, 4 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. Rachel Sharp, a firearms expert, explained, "At the garage, we were shown to the front passenger side. The pistol was found within. In an area to the left was a self-loading pistol in very poor condition. The weapon had not been linked to any other crimes, but its presence added a layer of mystery to Rafał's death. What made the case even more unsettling was the deliberate manner in which his body and the vehicle were destroyed. Police determined that the Mercedes had been stolen weeks earlier from Edinburgh's Oxgangs Road area on January the 24th, 2019. The car had been spotted in various locations, including Morningside, East Kilbride Town Centre and Cambuslang, before ending up ablaze in Greenhall Park. A homeowner in the area later testified about hearing a single gunshot around 6:45 p.m, followed by the sight of flames flickering in the park. He recalled, "It struck me as unusual because I didn't understand why someone would be shooting at that time of night." The motive for Rafał's elimination was initially unclear, but as investigators delved deeper, links to organised crime began to emerge. Police suspected the crime was tied to disputes over narcotics and debts. Rafał's execution-style killing bore the hallmarks of a targeted attack, orchestrated to send a message. Detective Superintendent Andrew Patrick described the challenges of piecing together Rafał's movements in his final hours. "We are being thorough in our inquiries to piece together the last known movements of Rafał. As always, I continue to appeal to anyone with information on Rafał's whereabouts on February the 11th who may have seen the stolen Mercedes. No matter how small or insignificant they think it might be, it could be vital to our investigation." The public's reluctance to come forward mirrored the earlier difficulties in Gary Moore's case. Detective Chief Inspector Kevin Jameson emphasised, "I believe there are people in the community who know who is responsible for this elimination, I would urge you to come forward. His family has been left devastated by his death, and they deserve answers. Rafal's family in Poland, including his partner and child, were left shattered. For them, the pain was compounded by the knowledge that Rafal had unknowingly walked into the crosshairs of a violent gangland feud. His life, like Gary Moore's, was cut short in a calculated act of brutality. As investigators unravelled the connections between the executions of Gary Moore and Rafal Lyko, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a violent crime spree that spanned months, revealing the existence of a ruthless hit squad, Barry Harvey, Darren Owen and Thomas Guthrie, who had orchestrated a reign of terror across Lanarkshire and beyond. Their list of crimes extended beyond elimination. The trio's actions were calculated, cold-blooded and executed with chilling precision. Among the most notable incidents was an attempted elimination on July the 19th, 2018 in Glasgow's Lauriston area. The target, lawyer Joe Shields. In the middle of the bustling city, the assailants attacked Shields with a knife, striking him repeatedly on the head and body. The brutal assault left him permanently disfigured, and he narrowly escaped death. Shields later died of unrelated causes in February 2023, but the scars of that encounter remained a grim reminder of the gang's violent methods. The violence escalated further on December 3rd, 2018, when the gang attempted to take out Scott Bennett outside a veterinarian practice in Rutherglen. Bennett, a 42-year-old man, was ambushed in a car park, where the assailants discharged a firearm at him, striking him in the head. He miraculously survived the attack, though the trauma he endured was immeasurable. Detectives pieced together how these crimes were linked through the trio's distinct modus operandi: stolen vehicles, masked appearances, and calculated efforts to destroy evidence. The white Skoda Fabia used in Gary Moore's elimination and the black Mercedes GLE in Rafal Lyko's case were part of this strategy. Both vehicles were burned to ashes after the crimes, erasing critical forensic evidence and frustrating investigators. At the heart of these cruel activities stood three men who thought themselves too smart to be caught. Barry Harvey, the 35-year-old ringleader, was described as a cold-blooded killer during the trial. Prosecutors revealed how he treated his criminal activities as a business, using meticulous planning to execute his violent missions. His associate, Thomas Guthrie, was the getaway driver in multiple crimes, including Gary Moore's elimination. Often described as the enforcer, he was feared for his ruthless efficiency and unwavering loyalty to Harvey's commands. Guthrie, already serving a life sentence for his role in that crime, was also implicated in other violent acts, including the attack on Joe Shields. Darren Owen, at just 23 years old, was the youngest member of the group, but no less ruthless. He had already made a name for himself as a cold-blooded hitman. He was directly involved in the assassination of Rafal Lyko and the attempted eliminations of Scott Bennett. Owen's youth belied his cruel capacity for violence, making him a key player in the gang's operations. The connection between the crimes lay in the trio's ties to Scotland's organised crime network. Narcotics and debt disputes frequently surfaced as underlying motives, Detective Superintendent Andrew Patrick explained. Although these were all targeted attacks, these individuals showed no regard for the communities and families affected. The violence involved in each of these cases, which resulted into the death of two men, is absolutely senseless. The trio's reign of terror stretched across 7 months, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Their actions exposed a deeply entrenched criminal underworld that operated with little regard for human life. For the victims and their families, the consequences were irreparable. But while their crimes were executed with precision, their arrogance ultimately led to their downfall. The stolen vehicles, eyewitness accounts, and relentless police work began to close the net around them. The investigation would culminate in a trial that exposed their heinous deeds in full detail. The pursuit of justice for Gary Moore, Rafal Lyko, and the countless other victims of the violent hit squad culminated in a high-profile trial that gripped the nation. The three men responsible for the terror they unleashed, Barry Harvey, Darren Owen, and Thomas Guthrie, faced a long list of charges that painted an alarming portrait of their ruthless criminal activities. The trial, which took place at the High Court in Glasgow, spanned several weeks, with the details of the gang's reign of terror laid bare for all to see. It was a trial that revealed not just the brutality of the men involved, but also the lengths they'd gone to in order to evade justice. Barry Harvey, who was found guilty of the elimination of Gary Moore, was sentenced to 29 years in prison. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Not only had he masterminded the hit, but he'd also arranged the getaway, ensuring that his crime would be carried out with chilling precision. Harvey's role in the execution of Gary Moore was just one piece of a much larger puzzle that included the elimination of Rafal Lyko and a string of attempted eliminations. He was a man driven by violence and money, his actions dictated by a cold, calculated desire to eliminate those who stood in his way. Thomas Guthrie, who had acted as the getaway driver in the Gary Moore case, was also found guilty of the attempted assassination of Scott Bennett. His involvement in the gang's activities extended beyond just driving the getaway vehicle. He was complicit in the planning and execution of several violent attacks. Guthrie's life sentence was extended by a further 8 years, adding to the years he had already served for his part in the assassination of Gary Moore. Darren Owen, the third member of the gang, was convicted of the elimination of Raphael Lyko. His involvement in the crime spree was undeniable. Owen had been part of the gang that lured Lyko to his death, and his actions in the shooting were pivotal in ending the life of a man who had come to Scotland seeking a better future. Owen received a 22-year sentence for his part in the eliminations and the violent attacks on others, including the failed attempt on Scott Bennett's life. The courtroom drama unfolded with gripping testimony, not just from the prosecution, but from the families of the victims. Gary Moore's family, devastated by the loss of their loved ones, attended the trial every day, offering emotional support to each other as they faced the men responsible for the gruesome death of their son, brother and father. In statements made following the trial, they expressed a mixture of grief and relief. Gary's father, Lindsay Moore, along with his wife Margaret, shared their sorrow. Gary is missed every day. These people have robbed him and us of our future, blowing our family apart. Life will never be the same again. We will be forever grateful for the support that we have received from the police and court liaison, for their unwavering understanding and support, and seeing us through the most devastating time in our lives. Nothing will bring back Gary or mend the devastation to his family, but we take comfort now that justice has been served. The emotional toil on the families was made even more distressing by the fact that their loved ones had been taken away from them by men who showed no regards for the lives they had destroyed. Gary's mother, Angela, and sister, Lindsay, shared their own heart-wrenching thoughts. Gary was a much-loved dad to 2 young children. He was a son, a brother, a nephew, an uncle, and a friend to many. He will be remembered by us every day as a gentle giant with the best laugh. He loved the gym, loved listening to his favourite songs on repeat, but most importantly loved his family and was loved in return by them. Despite the guilty verdicts, the families of the victims knew that nothing could undo the pain caused by the eliminations. The damage was irreparable, but in the wake of the trial, there was a sense of closure. The men responsible for the deaths of Gary Moore and Raphael Lyko had been held accountable, and their reign of terror had finally come to an end. The ripple effect of the gang's crimes extended far beyond the courtroom. For the families of Gary Moore and Raphael Lyko, the trauma of their loss was a permanent scar. Their grief was matched only by the fear that gripped communities across Lanarkshire, where the violent spree had left lasting wounds. Gary Moore's family spoke extensively about the devastation his elimination had caused. His sister Lindsay described the anguish they endured. Our hearts have been broken, and we cannot understand how anyone could even consider taking this course of action against another human being. People who really knew Gary know how much he valued friends and family. They were the centre of his life. His mother, Angela, reflected on his character. He will be remembered by us every day as a gentle giant with the best laugh. He loved the gym, loved listening to his favourite songs on repeat, but most importantly, he loved his family and was loved in return by them. For Raphael Lyko's family, the pain was compounded by distance. His partner and child, still in Poland, were left to grapple with the senselessness of his death. Raphael had come to Scotland hoping to reconnect with family, only to fall victim to a violent criminal network. His life was cut short in an act of deliberate cruelty, leaving his family to mourn a man who was taken from them far too soon. The gang's brazen violence also shattered the sense of safety in Airdrie, where Gary Moore's elimination had taken place. The sight of a man being gunned down on his own driveway in front of his home sent shockwaves through the community. Children who had been playing nearby were left traumatised, their innocent games interrupted by the horrors of death. For weeks after the incidents, the streets were eerily quiet, with residents afraid to venture out after dark. For many, the guilty verdicts brought a measure of closure, but they could not undo the harm inflicted on the victims' families or the wider community. Behind the convictions of Barry Harvey, Darren Owen and Thomas Guthrie lay a story of relentless determination by Police Scotland. The investigation spanned years, requiring meticulous attention to detail and unwavering focus to bring the perpetrators to justice. Detective Superintendent Andrew Patrick reflected on the challenges his team faced in piecing together the complex web of evidence. Each of these serious incidents was challenging inquiries to work on individually, and our officers were meticulous in going through every detail in what was an incredibly protracted investigation. The use of forensic evidence, witness interviews and digital tracking played a crucial role in linking the gang to their crimes. From the white Skoda Fabia that was used in Gary Moore's elimination to the black Mercedes GLE found burning in Greenhall Park, investigators worked tirelessly to establish connections and follow the trail of destruction left by the gang. Forensic teams examined burned-out vehicles and firearms, recovering enough evidence to tie the suspects to their crimes despite their evidence to cover their tracks. Community cooperation also proved vital, even in the face of fear. Although public response was initially limited, detectives revisiting crime scenes and engaging with locals eventually led to critical breakthroughs. Officers combed through hours of CCTV footage, conducted door-to-door inquiries, and repeatedly appealed for witnesses to come forward. The persistence paid off. Patrick acknowledged the role of the community in securing justice. By using all means available to us, and by the inquiry teams working independently but in tandem to piece together the wider picture, we were able to find a pattern of behaviour which ultimately culminated in today's convictions. The trial itself was a triumph for the prosecution team, who worked alongside the police to bring the perpetrators to justice. Patrick noted, "Throughout this investigation, we have worked closely with the Crown Office on what was a very unique set of circumstances which brought these crimes together in one trial. The sentence handed down sent a clear message to Scotland's criminal underworld. Harvey, Owen and Guthrie were not just convicted, they were exposed as cold-blooded assassins whose violent sprees would not go unpunished. Harvey received 29 years for his role as the orchestrator, while Owen and Guthrie were handed sentences of 22 years and 8 additional years respectively. Their sentences reflected the severity of the crimes and the pain they had inflicted on families and communities. For police, the case was a reminder that persistence could overcome even the most challenging investigations. Patrick expressed his gratitude to the team. "I believe these convictions show those intent on committing crimes that no matter how much preparation you make, how many steps you take to frustrate an investigation, or how long it has been since the crime has been committed, we will not give up." The story of the gang's crimes and their eventual capture serves as a reminder of the cost of violence, but it also underscores the resilience of those who stand against it. Justice was served, not just for Gary Moore and Raphael Lyko, but for all the victims of the gang's terror. Their families can now find some solace in knowing that those responsible have been held accountable. As Gary Moore's mother, Angela, put it, "Those responsible for his death will now face the consequences of their actions. But what they don't realise or care about is that we will also suffer from their actions for the rest of our lives too." The convictions of Barry Harvey, Darren Owen and Thomas Guthrie marked the culmination of years of violence and terror. These men, now infamous for their roles in the eliminations of Gary Moore and Raphael Lyko, were not unknown to law enforcement. Each had a criminal history that painted a picture of their descent into Scotland's organised crime underworld. One hallmark of their operations was the use of stolen vehicles. In the elimination of Gary Moore, the gang relied on a white Skoda Fabia that had been stolen weeks earlier. To avoid detection, they swapped its original licence plates with falsified ones, ensuring it wouldn't easily be identified. After completing their wicked deed, they drove the car to Milngavie, where it was set ablaze. The burning of the vehicle served two purposes: to destroy any forensic evidence and to sever ties to the crime scene. The same technique was later used in the execution of Raphael Lyko, where a stolen black Mercedes GLE became both the execution weapon and a funeral pyre. The careful planning of these eliminations extended beyond just vehicles. In Gary Moore's case, the assassins conducted reconnaissance of his home in Gartner's Drive before the attack. Neil Anderson, an associate of the gang, played an unwitting role in luring Gary outside. He was sentenced way earlier in the proceedings. Carrying a bag of chips, Anderson arrived at Gary's house shortly before the incident, engaging him in casual conversation on the doorstep. This provided the assailant with a clear shot when the white Skoda Fabia arrived. Witness accounts revealed how the car's headlights flashed as it slowed down, a subtle signal that the plan was in motion. The gunman emerged from the rear passenger seat, his identity concealed by a hooded top and blue latex gloves. Armed with a weapon, he fired 9 shots at Gary. The precision of the attack left no doubt that this was a professional hit. Within seconds, the assailant was back in the car, which sped off into the night, leaving chaos and devastation in its wake. In the elimination of Raphael Lyko, the gang's meticulous planning was equally evident. Raphael, a Polish national, was in Scotland for just 2 days before he was killed. On February the 11th, 2019, he was lured to Greenhill Park in Blantyre, where the black Mercedes GLE had been prepared for the crime. Forensic investigators later discovered that Raphael had been shot in the head before the car was set alight. Beyond these 2 eliminations, the gang employed similar tactics on other violent crimes. In the attempted execution of Scott Bennett outside a veterinary practice in Cathkin, the attackers used weapons to instill fear and assert dominance. Bennett, who miraculously survived being hit in the head, became another victim of their cold-blooded strategy. Witnesses described the attack as swift movements, their escape as seamless as their arrival. The community's reluctance to speak wasn't without cause. The gang's violent reputation and their ability to instill fear left potential witnesses hesitant to come forward. This wasn't just about the immediate threat of retaliation. It was a deeper fear of becoming entangled into the web of organised crime that had already claimed 2 lives. For residents of Airdrie and beyond, the sense of vulnerability was palpable. The silence was not limited to the community at large. Even those close to the crimes were reluctant to speak. Neil Anderson, who had been standing with Gary moments before the elimination, initially refused to cooperate with investigators. It wasn't until later in the investigation that his involvement as an unwitting participant in the setup came to light. His silence, whether driven by fear or guilt, reflected the pervasive grip of the gang's intimidation tactics. Gary Moore's family, devastated by his loss, took on the responsibility of breaking the silence. In this heartfelt public appeal, his sister Lindsay pleaded for witnesses to come forward. "Please don't let another family suffer like we have. If you know anything, please tell the police." Her words echoed the frustration of the investigators, who faced an uphill battle against a wall of silence. The fear in the community wasn't just a barrier to solving these crimes, it was a symptom of the broader influence wielded by organised crime. The gang's reputation extended beyond their immediate actions, creating an environment where speaking out carried immense risk. Even with the support of law enforcement, many residents felt that the consequences of coming forward outweighed the potential benefits. Detective Superintendent Burton underscored the importance of breaking this cycle. "A guy is running about with a gun. We need to take him off the streets." His appeals were not only for justice, but also for the restoration of safety and trust in the community. The silence that initially hampered the investigations began to crack, thanks to the relentless efforts of the police and the courage of a few individuals. But the fear that allowed the gang to operate for so long left a lasting scar on the communities they terrorised. Even as justice was served, the impact of their reign of violence was felt long after the convictions, an indication of the human cost of organised crime. Behind the headlines of violent eliminations and gang disputes were 2 men whose lives were tragically cut short: Gary Moore and Raphael Lyko. Both were more than victims of a brutal underworld. They were fathers, sons and brothers, leaving behind families grappling with unimaginable grief. To understand the weight of their loss, it's important to look beyond the circumstances of their deaths and into the lives they led before tragedy struck. Gary Moore was a 32-year-old gym owner in Airdrie, known amongst his friends and family as a gentle giant. A father of 2 young children, he had a passion for fitness, which he turned into a career. To his loved ones, he was a figure of strength and resilience, someone who brought laughter and love to those around him. His family described him as someone who had never hurt anyone and who loved his family deeply. Yet Gary's path wasn't without its struggles. His sister Lindsay spoke candidly about his past, sharing that he had battled issues with addiction earlier in life. It was a fight he had seemed to win, transforming his life through fitness and hard work. As a self-defense instructor and gym owner, he channeled his energy into helping others, building a reputation as a positive force in his community. His devotion to his children and his family was evident in the way he prioritised them. Gary was a much-loved dad to 2 young children, his mother Angela and sister shared. He was a son, a brother, a nephew, an uncle, and a friend to many. His family described him as someone with an infectious laugh and a love for simple pleasures, like listening to his favourite songs on repeat. Thousands of miles away from Scotland, in Poland, Raphael Lyko's partner and young child still mourn his loss. Raphael, 36, had travelled to Scotland just 2 days before his death, planning to visit relatives in Tayside. A father and a partner, Raphael was remembered by those close to him as a hard-working and caring man. His family described him as a provider, someone who prioritised the well-being of those he loved. The detail of Raphael's connections to the gang remained murky. Investigators suspected his death was linked to narcotics and debt, but his family's reflection painted a different picture. To them, he was a man trying to balance his responsibilities with no indication that he was entangled in anything criminal. His death was as shocking as it was senseless, a loss that left his loved ones reeling. While the wounds inflicted by the gang's actions may never fully heal, the work of the police, prosecutors and community members ensured that their reign of terror ended where it belonged, in the confines of a prison cell. It may have been a win for the 3 criminals initially, as they escaped the clutches of the law, but in the end, it was the law that came out triumphant.